Hello, everybody. It's your boy, Pigskin Pete, back with another episode of the fifth quarter with Pete and Rover. Back with my esteemed colleague and friend, Spencer from Rubber Sports. Spencer, how you doing, buddy?
Oh, I'm doing well. I'm doing well on this Wednesday. We are getting kind of to the end of college football, which is a little unfortunate, but this season's definitely had some pretty interesting storylines.
It has, and we're like you said, we're getting down to the end of it. We were just talking off air about this weekend's games. This is one of the worst weekends in college football as far as having a great slate of games. However, there are a couple of really big, important games in the national picture. So I think we'll start off with the one that everybody's looking forward to seeing is the Penn State Nittany Lions traveling to Columbus, Ohio, where game day will be this week, and facing the number two Ohio State Buckeyes. The thing that's most interesting about this, aside from the fact that these are two top 10 teams, and Ohio State is, a preemptive favorite to make it to the national championship. And in fact, in Vegas, they are favored to win the national championship. But Penn State, people have written Penn State off because of that loss they had to Minnesota. It's hard to go undefeated in football. Most teams don't do it every year. Penn State, yeah, they kind of didn't play their best that day, and Minnesota came out and Minnesota wanted it more, and they played the better, and they were the better team, and it was in Minneapolis. But if Penn State somehow finds a way to upset Ohio State this week, Penn State will be in first place in the Big Ten East and will probably go on to win the Big Ten East, which would completely throw off everything as far as these playoff rankings are concerned. So, do you see a chance? I know Ohio State is favored by 18 points, or at least they were a couple of days ago. Do you see any chance in God's green earth that Penn State can pull off the upset against Ohio State this weekend?
I don't really see it. If I had to give the percentage chance, I'm going to give them 20%.
That's good. That's a fair amount, I think.
So maybe 15. Well, like 80% chance Ohio State is winning this game.
I agree with you. I think that's fair to both teams.
So yeah. Michigan State played Ohio State the toughest. Justin Fields struggled in the first half against Michigan State, and Wisconsin, they absolutely got blown off the field by Ohio State. I think Ohio State is one of the scariest teams I've ever seen play because even unlike you guys with Clemson, they haven't had any close games whatsoever. And you could point to their schedule, but I just think that Ryan Day has just been incredible. I mean, he's been perfect. This Ohio State team is like not even human. And what I want to see in this game so desperately as a college football fan, I even want to see Penn State have it be a one-score game in the fourth quarter. That's really all I ask, Pete. And if Ohio State blows out Penn State, then there's no telling how good this Ohio State team can be. But if this game is even close, then next week versus Michigan will be exciting. The Big Ten Championship might be very exciting. But this is one of the greatest coaching jobs from Ryan Day, and maybe it's just because Ohio State's recruiting is so good. Do you think that their schedule's been easy? Because I just think Ohio State at every ounce of the ball looks unbeatable. They just look they don't even look human, and it's similar to Clemson. It's pure dominance from Ohio State, but they've had no slip-ups all year, and I'd love to see it be a close game.
I don't like this whole Ohio State's got an easy schedule or this team. You can point to any team and say they have an easy schedule outside of maybe 3 or 4 teams in the country. Texas A&M had a gauntlet of a schedule. They had to play Georgia, Clemson, and Alabama. Same thing with South Carolina. They had to play the same 3 teams. Of course, A&M had to play LSU too. So A&M might have the toughest schedule in the country. But outside of that, every team's got a bunch of mediocre teams on their schedule and maybe 1 or 2 good teams along the way. So I don't put a whole lot of stock into that. Or what I look at is, like you just said, the dominance on both sides of the football. Now, Ohio State this week gets Chase Young back from suspension. That's going to be huge. Now, luckily they played 2 bad teams when he was suspended, Maryland and Rutgers. And Rutgers, they scored 21 points on Ohio State last week. So everyone's saying, "Oh, see, we told you Ohio State's no good." Well, no. Those were trash touchdowns at the end of the game, and Chase Young wasn't playing. Would have been a whole
59-21.
Yeah, it was a blowout. So first of all, I agree with you. I mean, does Penn State have a chance? Yeah, a chance. I'd say 15 to 20% the same way that you do. But I think in my bet now picks for the charity event that I'm doing, I have Ohio State covering the 18. So I think Ohio State's gonna. I wouldn't be surprised to see if this game was close in the first half, maybe. But I think at the end of the day, when it comes to depth and overall talent, you're going to see Ohio State pull away in the second half.
Do you think that Sean Clifford is not going to play well in the second half? Because I think the Penn State offense, like actually looking into the details of the game, I just think Penn State's offense is going to have trouble. Right. They're going to have trouble like sustaining drives in the second half and running the football. I think that could be a big problem. But guess what? I think Penn State's defensive line can contain the running game. It'll be good to see if Justin Fields can kind of almost be like Tanner Morgan was to Penn State. Now, here's why I'm very worried. I don't think Indiana's offense is all that good. Now, statistically, actually, they're known to be a very good offense, but I don't think their quarterback is anywhere near Ohio State's playmakers on the edge and J.K. Dobbins and Justin Fields. And if the weather is actually like a nice day in Columbus, this offense of Ohio State can just go off.
Yeah.
And Penn State's offense is not going to be able to score, like I believe, into the 40s or even into the mid-30s would be a really impressive day for Penn State's offense.
Yeah, look, I think it's a foregone conclusion. We already know that Ohio State's offense is going to put up points, right? So the question is, can Penn State match that? And I think, like I said a minute ago, the X factor in this is Chase Young. You know, the quarterback for Penn State, he's gonna have a rough day. It's one thing to fight off Chase Young for 1 quarter or 2 quarters. It's a whole different story if you have to do it for 4 quarters. And eventually Chase Young's going to get his. And he's the disruptor. He's the X factor. And at the end of the day, I just don't see a scenario where Penn State can keep up with scoring with Ohio State, mainly because Chase Young.
And you know what? You watched Minnesota the last 2 weeks, right? I mean, you watched the Minnesota-Penn State game, and you've seen Minnesota all year. And I think that they're very well coached and kind of overachievers. And I don't think they're anywhere close to like Ohio State. And you know how big I am of a Minnesota fan. I mean, just their defense against Iowa was nowhere near where it needed to be. So if Penn State struggles with like Indiana and Minnesota, the good thing about this, Pete, is that James Franklin is, I think, he's so close to an elite coach. I'd say he's one notch below it, you know? Yeah. That's why I'm excited about this game. He plays Ohio State so well. I mean, if you remember, J.T. Barrett had to have the miracle game just to beat Penn State. They blocked a field goal. If this game was at Penn State at night, it would be an incredible atmosphere at Beaver Stadium.
Well, yeah. Here's the thing, though. I think that Penn State is a really, really good team. I think James Franklin is a really, really good football coach. I think Penn State is worthy of being ranked in the top 10, whether that's at 10, 9, 8, or 7, or wherever you want to put them. But Ohio State is not a good team. They're a great team. This is the difference between what you're seeing in the top 3 and 4 teams right now. And in my opinion, there's a separation between that third spot and everybody else. You could take number 4, Georgia, and go all the way up to Minnesota at number 10, where they're ranked right now. And I think there's a lot of similarities between all those teams. But when you're talking about Clemson, LSU, and Ohio State, they're on a different level than the rest of these teams. That's the way I feel.
So far, yeah, I would put the 2 of Clemson and Ohio State.
Yes.
And then I would actually put LSU
at third.
Combined with, I think LSU versus Oklahoma would actually be a tremendous football game.
They're similar teams.
Yeah, and how about LSU versus Justin Herbert and Oregon? That won't be a blowout at all.
No, I think that'd be a competitive game.
Yeah, even Utah with their running game and defense.
Yeah.
But Oregon versus Ohio State or Clemson would not. I don't think it would be that good.
All right, so let's go ahead and talk about the Pac-12 right now, because the Pac-12 I think is prime in a very prime spot to make it into the playoffs for the first time in since the first year of the playoffs, right? The first year of the playoffs, Oregon got in. There hasn't been a Pac-12 team in there since, right? Or am I missing that? I think that's right. Or did Washington get in one time?
Washington did. Remember they played Alabama and Atlanta with Jake Browning?
Okay, yeah. So the first 2 years of the playoff, the Pac-12 got in, but they haven't the last 3 years. That's the way it went. But anyways,
how many years has the playoff been around?
There's been 5 seasons.
You had Oklahoma, Clemson, and then Alabama and
Ohio State won the first playoff.
Yes.
And then the next 4 have been split between Alabama and Clemson. They each have 2. That's the 5 years.
Yes, you had Alabama beating Clemson, Clemson beating Alabama,
both twice.
Alabama, Georgia.
Yeah.
And Alabama, Clemson again.
Yeah. So there's only been Clemson, Alabama, and Ohio State have won national championships in the playoff era so far.
Right.
But anyway, the Pac-12 I think is sitting in a good spot because if LSU wins out and beats Georgia in the SEC championship, they're obviously in. Okay. If Clemson wins out, which they probably should because there's nobody on their schedule that could really challenge them, they'll get in and probably stay at 3. If Ohio State finds a way to win the Big Ten and they'll get in. And so we all think that's going to happen because they're dominant. So that 4th spot, if all those 3 things happen that I just said, if Ohio State, LSU, and Clemson all make it in, the 4th spot, in my opinion, provided that one of these Pac-12 teams wins out, whether it's Utah or Oregon, will get in ahead of any of these other teams. They'll get in ahead of Oklahoma. They'll get in ahead of Alabama, in my opinion, because they'll have a better resume and they'll have a conference championship under their belt.
What happens if Oklahoma wins the conference championship?
I think that Oregon would get in ahead of Oklahoma as a Pac-12 champ. I think that Utah would too.
I think it depends on if Baylor can beat. I think if Baylor can win, I'll tell you this, though, from a marketing standpoint, Oklahoma will drive more eyeballs than Jalen Hurts at a million.
We're not talking about marketing. We're talking about who's going to get in.
But I think marketing is a big key factor in the college football playoff.
I disagree.
This goes back to my Tua philosophy. Because if Tua's in the game, Alabama is going to be in the playoff, I believe, because Tua is that good of a quarterback. But if Mac Jones is very average versus Auburn,
right,
like put it this way, even if Tua beats Auburn, Alabama's in the playoff. But now that you have a backup quarterback, they're going to take that into account.
But what you're suggesting is that the playoff committee is in there discussing openly of what would get better TV ratings. I don't think that's happening.
I think that might be a part of the human bias.
I don't think the playoff committee cares about TV ratings. That's my point.
I agree with you. That by that scenario.
And by the way, I'm not sure that it would get better ratings. I think that an Oregon in the playoffs would actually improve ratings because you get the West Coast involved for the first time in the past 3 years.
Let's talk about Alabama compared to Oregon's resume. Let's talk about Alabama. So Alabama, their loss is the best loss. It's LSU. It's LSU at home.
Okay. What's their best win?
The rest of their schedule, they've blown out. Texas A&M.
Okay.
Auburn will be a decent win.
Okay, I got you there.
Duke is terrible.
All right. So here's the thing. Oregon will have a win over a top 10 team if they beat Utah in the Pac-12 championship.
Yes.
That's something Alabama does not have is a top 10 win.
Yes.
And their loss, as you put it, a good loss, even though I completely hate that term. There's no such thing as a good loss. A loss is a loss. But I understand what you're saying. Yeah. I think that a week 1 last second loss to Auburn in a neutral field is considered to be a good loss.
I absolutely agree with you.
Yeah,
because
so
it's way back at the beginning of the year. Now, but you look at Oregon, Washington State, they needed a field goal just to beat Washington State. I look at but Oregon in the Pac-12, there's not teams ranked in the top 25 in the Pac-12, which is a big, big problem.
But Utah will be. And here's the other thing I think about. I think that we overthink the way that the committee looks at things. I think they value, number one, winning a game. It doesn't matter how you won it, but just winning it. Even if it's a close one, you win. That's the most important thing. That's number one. If you lose, it's how you lose. Okay, so they'll forgive it. We've seen this. We see this with Georgia right now. Georgia is sitting there at number 4 with what people would consider to be a loss to a bad team in South Carolina, a team that's only won 4 games this year, right? But they lost it in overtime. It wasn't like they got blown off the field by South Carolina, so they're willing to forgive a loss if it's a close loss. But if you get blown off the field like Ohio State did the past 2 seasons by Iowa and Purdue respectively, then they got left out. So it's how you lose. It's not necessarily that you lose, it's how you lose.
But I think it's also how you play.
Well, that
Like if you can blow teams out. And that's why Oklahoma is in a lot of trouble.
well that's why Clemson's where
Oklahoma,
they are.
even though they won, they didn't play well in the
Right.
first half.
Right. But at the end of the day, they did beat an undefeated Baylor team.
Yes, at the end of the day, you want to put the best 4 teams in the playoff. That's what the committee is thinking. And I agree with you on both Oregon and Utah, because you look at Utah, they played a Friday night game in the very beginning part of the season against USC, against a quarterback they couldn't prepare for.
And we don't even really have to speculate, because they've already told us. I mean, we're at the end of the season now. They already have both Oregon and Utah ranked ahead of Oklahoma. So provided that all 3 of those teams win out, or one of the Pac-12 teams wins out and Oklahoma wins out, do you see a scenario where Oklahoma could jump one of those teams? I don't see that. They're not going to have a better win.
They cannot,
Right.
Unless Baylor continues to play really well.
It's still, a win over Baylor in the Big 12 championship would still not be as good of a win as Oregon over Utah or Utah over Oregon.
So then it's over for Oklahoma.
Basically. But here's what Oklahoma needs. They need a lot of chaos. They need Georgia to lose. They need
Oregon and Utah to lose.
Oregon and Utah to both lose at some point between now and the end of the season. And so
that's
they need,
not happening, man.
They need a lot of help. And unfortunately for Alabama, we were talking about this, is the Tua situation. Again, there is a chance, a very outside chance, that Alabama could back their way into the playoffs. There would have to be a lot of chaos. You probably have to have Oregon lose, Utah lose, Oklahoma lose, and Georgia.
I have a question for you.
So, and that's a lot to have.
Say that Talia Tagovailoa, Tua's brother, is inserted somehow as a quarterback for Alabama, and he puts up 5 touchdowns against Auburn, like a Cardale Jones situation.
I don't know that will matter. I think it will still come down to the wins and losses.
Yeah.
Because you'll have Oklahoma as a Big 12 champ. You'll have either Oregon or Utah as a Pac-12 champ, all with 1 losses, and that'll be the deciding factor. That'll be, a couple of years ago, whenever Alabama made it into the playoffs, even though they didn't win their division, there wasn't a bunch of other teams breathing down their neck as much as there are now. So they didn't need a whole lot of help to make that happen. They only had 1 team, I think was Ohio State, was the team that got left out that year, if I'm not mistaken. But now you have 3 or 4 teams breathing down their neck, and so they're going to be on the outside looking in. And I still think, like you said, the committee is going to look at it and say, yeah, Alabama, definitely one of the most talented teams, probably one of the best 4 or 5 teams in America, even without Tua. But can they really win it all without Tua? Against Ohio State, Clemson, or LSU?
Exactly.
Probably not. So
I think it is much easier for these human being committee members if the Oregon Ducks are the Pac-12 team, because you have an NFL quarterback in his senior year with Cristobal.
I agree 100%. And you also have one of the best quarterbacks in America. You have one of the best offensive lines in America. And listen, Oregon's defense is not bad.
Exactly, a very good defense.
Yeah. So yeah, I think
they've been blowing teams out, and they've been silently just doing their business. Utah is a harder sell. It just is. No one really knows about Utah. Yeah. They really don't. And this does play into these committee members. I really think marketability of the Utah Utes is just, it's non-existent.
I don't know. I think people like to see a Cinderella story, though. I do. I think that actually
they're a Cinderella. They're not like Minnesota that's getting pumped down every.
But if Utah makes it in the playoffs, I think that is a Cinderella story. Even if they don't win the first round, there'll be a lot of eyeballs on that game, just because Utah, who's in most people's minds somebody that can't compete with these other powerhouses, just them being there will drive viewership. I mean, I think it will. I don't think that a team that's not normally there hurts viewership.
So let's talk about the ramifications of what we just discussed. I believe that if Oklahoma goes 12-1, just listening to how happy Lincoln Riley was to beat Baylor last week, you saw the jubilation with Oklahoma and Jalen Hurts. If Oklahoma gets left out, there's a very high likelihood that Lincoln Riley is saying, what more do I have to do? I lose a game against Kansas State. I'm eliminated. I think there's a great chance it goes to the Cowboys or the NFL. I really do. I think that'd be the perfect storm for the NFL.
Yeah, I doubt he'll leave. But just by being left out of the playoffs one time for that. And it's not really even Oklahoma's fault. Again, this comes back to the same argument with Alabama, is that there's just so many other teams in the mix this year that it makes it harder for a one-loss Oklahoma to get. On most years, Oklahoma would get in as a one-loss Big 12 champ. But
right.
But this year you have all these other teams that are also one loss, and you start comparing resumes and wins versus losses and all that sort of thing. It just makes it more muddy. It just muddies the waters a little bit more. So it's not really Oklahoma's fault that some of the teams that they played this year. I mean, a perfect example of this is Texas. Texas in the preseason in the AP poll was ranked in the top 10. Well, Texas is no good. Texas isn't even ranked anymore. Texas has 4 or 5 losses now. I mean, Texas has been a huge disappointment. Now, if Texas had remained a top 10 or 15 team throughout the entire year, and Oklahoma had a win against them, that might put them over the top over Oregon. But they don't have that. So they're a victim of the situation that's going on in the Big 12. And Clemson is in the same situation. The only difference is that Clemson hasn't lost a game, and they've been dominant out of the 10 games they played. They've been completely dominant in 9 of them.
Right.
So, but if Clemson would have lost to North Carolina, they might be on the outside looking in right now. But they happened to win that game. So yeah, there is some luck involved in it.
The Pac-12 is a complete toss-up to make the playoff. I'll tell you the scenario that I believe I'd give. I would give Georgia, if they beat A&M this week, I would give them against LSU in Atlanta like a home game. I would maybe even take Georgia to win outright. It's like a 50-50 game to me.
Against LSU?
Yes, against LSU.
That's
the scariest situation for the Pac-12.
That's a fair point, because here's the thing. I still would pick LSU to win the game, but Georgia would be the best defense they played all year by a long shot. So yes. Georgia might be able to at least slow down that offense to a point where they can stay in the game. The issue that I have for Georgia is they haven't proven they can score a lot of points on anybody, really. I mean, anybody outside of maybe a cupcake team.
Right.
But I do. It's an interesting matchup. I mean, I think LSU is a better team collectively, but it's all about matchups, and I think Georgia matches up well against LSU. So I take that. I wouldn't take that game lightly if I were LSU.
The officiating will be favored in Georgia's favor. I know that they're not supposed to be, but the SEC wants 2 teams in the playoff. And I'll tell you this, Georgia.
But you're assuming that the referees care about that.
If the Plumlee kid from Mississippi runs the ball for that kind of yardage. Now, I guess you could say I think LSU's defense might be a little bit underrated. I think people are really making a huge deal about how bad the defense is. They break apart at the end of games. I just think Georgia's very complete. And if you look back at the track record of Jake Fromm in big games, that's when he's at his best.
If Georgia ends up beating LSU, it won't be because the referees are favoring.
No, I think Georgia is a damn good team. They're good on each side of the ball. Now, when they play an Ohio State or Clemson, that'll be unbelievable. I can't wait. I would love to see that.
Here's another great story about Georgia and how they can affect the playoffs. Like you just said, if Georgia beats LSU, there's a very good chance that 2 SEC teams could get in.
I think it's over.
Georgia could possibly catapult themselves up to 2 or 1 in that situation, and then LSU would probably fall to 4. So you'd have Georgia and LSU in there, and Ohio State and Clemson or Penn State or whoever the Big Ten champ is in Clemson.
But you're not going to have a rematch, I don't think.
So if you're a Pac-12 fan, if you're a fan of Oregon, you're a fan of Utah, or if you're a fan of Oklahoma, you do not want Georgia to win the SEC. Because that will leave you out most likely.
And a sneaky game is Texas A&M this week going into Athens. That's a sneaky game.
It's a sneaky game for one reason. Obviously, we both probably agree that Georgia's a better team than Texas A&M. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But Texas A&M is not exactly a pushover or a cupcake by any stretch of the imagination. And on top of that, anytime you have a team who has nothing to lose, and what Texas A&M has nothing to lose, and you have a team that has everything to lose, and Georgia has everything to lose, that is a scary situation. So we'll find out. Even though most people just automatically say Georgia's going to beat Texas A&M, it's a foregone conclusion. We'll see what Georgia's really made of. If Georgia can go in there and manhandle Texas A&M, and I know it's in Athens, but if they manhandle Texas A&M, that is a proof positive that Georgia is a championship caliber team. If they falter or they lose to Texas A&M, then they're done, and they weren't probably meant to be there in the first place. But we'll see.
What teams did Texas A&M lose to go way back in this season?
Well, they lost to 3 top 10 teams: Auburn, Alabama, and Clemson.
Yes, they lost to Auburn, Alabama. Yeah, and the Clemson game was disappointing. The Alabama game was at home, but I don't think Georgia is actually. I don't know why. I just think that Tua and Alabama at that time was absolutely dominant. And if Tua was healthy, I would take Alabama over Georgia on a neutral site if Tua was healthy at that time. So
I agree with that.
And South Carolina, like, you look at Kellen Mond, this is the biggest game for him because if he wins this game, he gets to keep the job next year. He's been very up and down. They have really good quarterback commits coming in there. And for Jimbo Fisher, he's making a ton of money. This A&M team has some talent on it. This should be a close game. It absolutely should be a 10-point game in the fourth quarter of this game.
I don't know. I think that Texas A&M's offense is not elite. Okay, their defense isn't particularly elite either. They're good, but not elite. The difference is that Georgia has an elite defense and a manageable offense. So I think Georgia has the advantage. But I still think it could be possibly a close game.
Yeah, because come on, he lost to he hasn't been good at home all year. And then you look at who has Georgia really beaten that's a good offense? None. A&M's the best offense that they've played all year, actually.
Well, I mean, Georgia's, offensively, I'd say Florida's probably the best offense they play.
That's a good point. Yeah.
But Florida's, they're not.
No, that's a good point. That's a great win. I forgot about that game.
And here's the other thing about Fromm is I don't think Fromm he's not going to lose you a game. He might not go out there in the fourth quarter and win it for you, but he's not going to lose it for you, which is not a bad thing. I mean, a lot of teams do have a quarterback that goes and loses it for them. So, he's solid and he's consistent.
It's why Jacob Eason left, because Eason has a higher ceiling, but he might lose it for you. Justin Fields might have lost it for them last year.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So if I think Fromm's a really good quarterback, he's not on the level of a Trevor Lawrence. He's not on the level of a Tua Tagovailoa. He's not on the level of a Joe Burrow even. But he's not a guy that's going to go out there and lose the football game for you. So I have a lot of respect for Fromm and what he's been able to do in that system, quite frankly.
Yeah, and he should come back if he doesn't win the championship.
Yeah, that's a good question. I haven't even thought about whether or not he'll come back. I don't know. I don't know what the advantage would be for him to come back. I don't think. I'm not sure he's going to raise his draft stock any more than it is this year. I think he is who he is. He's been the same guy for the past 3 years.
It seems like Fromm's been in college for like 15 years.
It does, and he looks like it too.
And you know what's so funny? Maybe it's social media that these kids like. It totally feels like if he were to come back to school next year that he's been in college for like longer than everybody else.
Yeah, he's like Hunter Renfrow. He's like 30 years old, but he's still playing.
Hunter, he's doing great for the Oakland Raiders, and he has more touchdowns than Odell Beckham.
He has more touchdowns than Debo. Everyone was saying Debo Samuel was going to be a better pro than Renfrow. Renfrow is he's that guy. He's that guy.
Yeah. He looks like a Walmart employee or whatever.
A greeter.
Yeah. And Debo is doing better, but yeah, I understand your point.
All right, so the last thing we'll talk about here is where they stand right now. If you are either Ohio State or LSU, because I'm of the opinion that Clemson is going to stay at 3 and not move up or down because they're not going to beat anybody of much notoriety to move up, even if they went out. And they're not going to, if they lose, they're going to fall out of the top 4 anyway, so it doesn't matter. So I think Clemson's going to stay at 3. I think that's where they are now. That's where they're going to stay as long as they win these last 2 games. Now, Ohio State and LSU, on the other hand, Ohio State most likely, if they win out, is going to have a better resume in these last 3 weeks than LSU is, because Ohio State has to play Penn State, Michigan, and either Minnesota or Wisconsin to win out.
Yeah.
They will catapult up to number 1 most likely in the final rankings.
You really think so?
Oh yeah.
I disagree because look at the entire scale of the season. I mean, winning at Alabama, winning at Texas, beating Auburn and Florida, and then LSU's going to beat Georgia.
Yeah, but you're going to have to end the season. There's nobody that has a tougher 3-game stretch than Ohio State does to win out. You've got 3 top 15 teams.
But I think you need to look at the totality of the season and keep LSU at 1.
All right, but so when the first rankings came out, they had Ohio State at 1 and LSU at 2. So LSU went out and beat Alabama. Then they moved LSU up to number 1 and pushed Ohio State back. So what makes you think now that Ohio State beats 3 top 15 teams in a row that they won't leapfrog LSU? Look, LSU don't have to beat Georgia, but outside of that, they got Texas A&M and Arkansas.
I understand.
Yeah, so my point is,
I would still keep LSU at 1 because wins are so good.
All right, so forget what you think and what your opinion is. That's not the point of this exercise here. The point is, if you're LSU or Ohio State, you want the number 1 spot. Just assuming that Clemson's going to stay at 3.
Yes.
You don't want to play Clemson in the first round if you're either one of those teams, do you? You want to play?
Hell no.
Right.
No, I think for LSU, it's the biggest possible thing for them to actually get to the number 1 seed. It's huge. It's between winning, because guess what? I think if LSU, whoever's at number 4 in the Pac-12 or Oklahoma, LSU's going to beat them in the first round of the playoffs.
All
and that's LSU, no matter what, against a national championship, and the game is in New Orleans.
And Ohio State would too if they were number 1, though.
Yes.
So, and I disagree with you. I think that if both LSU and Ohio State win out and win their conferences and go undefeated for the season, I think Ohio State will be number 1 to come to the last rankings.
As a Clemson fan, you want?
I'd rather play LSU than Ohio State in the first round.
Correct. But you know what the committee could be thinking? The best game for them, could be, again, what they're thinking is, they don't want Clemson in there again. They want Ohio State versus LSU because Joe Burrow and his former team, they want them in the title game.
Yeah, I don't know if they. Again, that's speculation. I don't know if they really think about
speculation.
I don't know if they think of things in that. I don't know if they think of things in that way.
They want LSU at number 1, but it'll be very close.
Yeah, I think Ohio State will be number 1 if they both went out. We'll see who's right. I mean, that's all we can.
2 bowl games this year?
As far as the playoffs go?
Yes. Where are they located?
Arizona and Atlanta. That's the semifinal rounds, and then the championship games in New Orleans.
Well, it'd actually be a Fiesta Bowl rematch between you and Ohio State.
If Ohio State came in at 2, yes. If LSU came in at 2, it would be in Atlanta, and it would be Clemson versus LSU in Atlanta.
Wait. I don't know about that, because if you have a Pac-12 team, you're going to want Atlanta for Ohio State.
No, I think it's pretty set. Basically, the number 1 team is playing the number 1 and number 4 seed team. Wait, hold on. Let me think about this for a second.
You don't want to have Oregon playing Arizona.
I thought they said, and this is just something I read, that if Clemson plays LSU, it'll be in Atlanta. If Clemson plays Ohio State, it would be in Arizona. I don't know if that's true or not. It's just something I read.
Okay.
Based on the projections. So I have to look into that.
Yeah.
Into that more. And I mean, you're right. It might depend on who the 4th team is. I didn't even think about that. But
yeah. Do you want to pick some of these games this week?
I've already picked some. Let me see if I can find my notes here.
How disappointing was Baylor's loss last week?
Well, it was devastating for them as a playoff contender, but and as the fact that they gave up a 25-point lead in the second half was pretty shocking. I mean, I don't know whether you look at it was it more disappointing for Baylor to lose that game, or was it more impressive for Oklahoma to have a comeback? Probably both, right?
I think Oklahoma is very set to come back with Lincoln Riley and that offense and Jalen Hurts. They almost, by the way, against Kansas State needed that onside kick.
Yeah, but have you ever seen a team that was more dominating than Baylor was in that first half? I mean, on both sides of the ball, they just destroyed Oklahoma. And then all of a sudden, it just completely did a 360 or a 180. And
it's because Baylor's offense is up and down, and Oklahoma was very sloppy in the first half.
Well, yeah.
They were turning the ball over recklessly. I think Oklahoma's a better team, but that's why I can't wait to see the championship game again.
I'm not sure that Oklahoma is a better team than Baylor. I mean, yeah, they won the game and they had to come back to do it, but I think Baylor folded, man. I mean, no disrespect. Credit to Oklahoma for coming back, but that was Baylor's game. I mean, Baylor was dominating the game. They completely folded. And
but it's at home. I think that Oklahoma's going to take care of them.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm not so sure about that.
They'll put the baby to bed.
I'm not so sure about that. We'll find out though. All right. So as far as the picks this week, I'll tell you my picks that I did for my bet now thing. I took the under 45.5 for the A&M and Georgia game. I think that's gonna be a low scoring game.
I like that's pretty good.
I took Minnesota at minus 13.5.
Yeah, I love that.
Against Northwestern.
And also Minnesota, I loved how PJ was pissed off to lose to Iowa. Like he said the team played terrible, and Minnesota showed a lot of grit to even make it a game late. So I agree with you.
Okay.
That's a great pick.
I took over 45 for Tennessee and Missouri.
That's a very surprising pick.
Okay, you have under?
Why do you think over?
Because I think that both of these defenses aren't that great.
I think actually they're both good.
And I think actually because Missouri's in the game's in Missouri, I think Missouri's actually going to score 25 to 30 points, even if they lose the game. So I think
Missouri's offense has just gone under a rock. I don't know why.
Well, Kelly Bryant was hurt for a while. He's back now. I think that if I had to pick this, I think the spread was Tennessee was +4. I would probably pick Tennessee with the points. As an underdog, but I'm too scared. I still don't trust Tennessee enough to do that, even though I think that they're much better than they were. But I think that the total score, no matter who wins this game, is going to be around 50 points. So I think over 45.
Yeah. I like Tennessee. For some reason, Vegas always disrespects them. Like even at Kentucky, they were underdogs.
They've earned that though over the past 10 years, 20 years probably. So
I think they beat Missouri outright.
All right, I wouldn't be surprised. I'm not saying that's not true. So I took the over 45 in that game. I took Ohio State at minus 18 against Penn State because Ohio State has played 9 games so far. They've covered the spread in 8 out of 9 games. Last week was the first time all season they haven't covered. They're at home. I think Penn State is a little bit of a paper tiger. I think that they're good, but I don't think they're on Ohio State's level. And I think Ohio State is going to pull away in the second half and win by 21 or more points.
And the public is all over Penn State, probably. I would expect the public to be on Penn State.
Yeah, if this game was in Happy Valley, I might not take the points with Ohio State. But the fact that it's in Columbus, I'm taking the minus 18.
Yeah.
That was my picks for the week. Any of them you're thinking of that I didn't bring up?
I like Arkansas and the big 44.
Yeah, we talked about that earlier. I think I probably would side with you on that.
I think that the NFL's a lot easier this week, but you also have like Texas Tech and TCU.
Oh, I stay away from the NFL betting. That's a total. No, I'll lose all my money if I do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. The NFL is way harder to bet than the colleges.
But there's some underdogs that like are good values, this week. Like even the Jets or even like your Carolina Panthers are getting like 9 points in New Orleans. Like,
I wouldn't touch it. The NFL scares me with betting. It
College
does.
For some reason scares me a little too.
Yeah, I know. I think I'm more comfortable with the college betting. The NFL, the difference is that there's such a huge chasm between talent, between like Clemson and Rutgers, right? I mean, that's a huge chasm. But in the NFL, the worst team in the NFL and the best team in the NFL, there's not a huge chasm. They're all professionals, and they all have professional coaches, professional players. And the Dolphins could beat the Patriots on any given day. So that's what the chances that Rutgers beats Clemson or Ohio State are 0, right? But the chances that Miami beats New England is maybe 20%.
But the spreads are a lot tight. But the spreads are tighter. So for an example, like New Orleans was only a 5-point favorite against Tampa Bay.
Yeah, listen. If you win playing the NFL, good for you. I'm not doing it. I've already learned my lesson with that. I don't trust the NFL.
College is a little difficult because you have so many big lines. But I get it. I'd have to look at the lines very closely for college. So yeah.
Yeah, I'm just more comfortable with the college betting, even though
Yeah,
I'm not great at it.
Stuff, but Pete, it was a ton of fun, man. I love doing it.
It's always a ton of fun. I want everybody to go check out my man Spencer from Rover Sports. Go check out his YouTube channel. He covers college basketball. He covers college football. He covers the NFL. Am I missing anything? What else you cover?
I got a little NBA on there.
A little bit of NBA on there. He does it all.
Yeah.
And, yeah, he does a great job over there on his channel. He does live streams. He does videos. He does it all. So go check him out. That's my man. All right. Thank you, Spencer. It's great. And I'll see you again next week, buddy.
It was a blast. Thanks, Pete.
All right, man.